Hey everyone, it's Jenny at jccards.com, and today I've got 3 cards to share with you, all using the same background stamp, and 3 very different cards. This one uses Distress Oxides, this one uses a monochromatic look and some fussy cutting, and this one uses watercolouring with Nuvo Shimmer powders, which I'm loving, and I'm totally going to do another video on this at a future date. So this is the background stamp I'm going to be using. It's the Sketch Floral background by Erin Lee Creative. Erin Lee is a new stamp company. Stamps and dies just recently came out. I think it was in November, and I bought nearly all of them because I love the collection. It's amazing, so you should totally check it out. So for my first card, I'm going to be doing some Distress Oxide Resist. And I'm starting with coloured cardstock, which is the trick for the look of this card. So I'm inking up the background stamp with some embossing ink, and I've got it in my stamp platform because I can use this to stamp the red rubber stamp. If you flip over the lid, you can use it to stamp red rubber stamps. And I've embossed it a couple of times. I treated it with my powder bag first just to make sure I didn't get any embossing powder sticking where I didn't want it. And then I'm embossing it with Icicle embossing powder by Brutus Monroe, which is a clear, fine embossing powder. And then I'm heating it with my heat tool. So we're now going to blend on some Distress Oxide inks. I'm starting off going from light to dark, and I'm using purple oxides. So this first one is shaded Lilac, and I'm being pretty heavy-handed. These are pretty juicy ink pads, and I'm just going all over the panel, completely covering it with the shaded Lilac. And then I'm coming in with Wilted Violet, and I'm coming in off the edges and going all the way around the panel towards the centre, but I am leaving a space in the middle where the shaded Lilac is showing. And you don't have to be particularly careful. Distress Oxide inks are opaque, and that's why they're really great to use with coloured cardstock, because they will completely cover over the cardstock itself with whatever colour of oxide you're using. And that really helps with this technique. And then going along the edges with some Seedless Preserves, which is a darker purple. And then if you don't have a good blend, you can just go back in with the earlier colours and just blend between the colours so that you get a bit more of a seamless blend. And as you'll see, the embossing powder, where it's heated, has resisted the oxides, and you can see the colour of the cardstock trapped underneath. And this becomes even more obvious if you use a cloth like I'm doing here and just buff away, and it will remove any of the Distress Oxide that's still sitting on top of the embossing powder, and you get this awesome look. You could do this with any colours of cardstock because, as I say, Distress Oxides are opaque. I'm then going over the florals with a clear Wink of Stella, which slightly lifts the Distress Oxide ink, which reacts with water, and there is water inside a clear Wink of Stella, and you get this lovely shimmery look. Now I slightly went off the bottom with the background stamp, so I'm going to die cut this panel with the Studio Katia Dotted Patterns Set 3 dies. It's the largest border die from the set, which just gives small rounded corners and sort of dots around the edge. Now this Be Brave die is also by Erin Lee Creative. I love this sentiment, and I've die cut it twice. The first time I've die cut it from Nina Solar White 110 pound cardstock, and this time I've die cut it from some fun foam. I think this is by Doris, and it's got adhesive on the back. And I've used the purple because I thought that went well with the colours of Distress Oxides I'd used. And I'm adhering down the fun foam first. You do have to be slightly careful when you're die cutting fun foam because it has a tendency to bend and stretch, and if you're adding cardstock on top, your sentiment may not exactly match if you've accidentally stretched the fun foam. So one tip would be to keep the die cut inside the fun foam, then adhere your cardstock on top, and that way you'll avoid that. However, I've adhered the fun foam first because I wanted to get a sort of shadow look, so you'll see that I'm adhering the white die cut slightly off from the purple fun foam die cut. I'm then using the rest of the purple fun foam and popping up my panel onto a white 110-pound top folding Nina Solar White card base. And as a finishing touch, I'm thickly applying Stickles in magenta all over the die cut. I actually had to leave that to dry overnight because I've gone over it so thickly, but as you can see, you get a fully encrusted die cut piece. Very, very glittery in real life. For my second card, I've cut a 6" by 6" panel of white cardstock and I've placed it into my stamp platform. I'm then using black ink, this is Midnight by Catherine Pooler Designs, and I'm stamping the entire background stamp onto this panel. The reason I've done it like this is because I'm going to cut out all of the images on this panel and I didn't want to miss any. I actually ran it through my scan and cut too. I didn't fussy cut it, but I know there are a few of you who absolutely love fussy cutting, so feel free, I'm not one of them. And this is what I came out with. So there was a couple of buds, a few leaves, a large bloom, another bloom, and I've basically sort of arranged them on a panel of Smoke and Mirrors cardstock by Catherine Pooler, which is A2 size, and I'm going to adhere them down. So this one I'm using liquid adhesive, and then later on I will be adhering them with fun foam for different dimension. For some interest in the back panel, and oops, I didn't clean my water brush, luckily I didn't mix it in, I'm using some white acrylic paint. I've added a little bit of water. The paint is by PaperArtsy, it's the Snowflake, and I'm just adding some small spatters over the back of the panel. You could of course protect your die cut or fussy cut shape with a piece of scrap paper, but as it was white I didn't really see much point in doing it. And then I've let it dry for a little bit, and then I'm adding in one of the other florals. I've got foam squares on the back of this one, and actually if you're clever you can line up some of the stems with other parts of the image, so it actually looks like one image. I then added some leaves and I've tucked some buds in the corner, which I'm just going to trim off any overhanging with my gigantic scissors. Someone commented the other day that they thought my scissors were huge. So I've added some fun foam onto a Smoke and Mirrors top folding card base. I'm adhering it down with double-sided tape, and then I've die cut the Love You Forever sentiment, also by Erin Lee Creative, from Silver Mirror cardstock, which has Stick It on the back of it before I die cut it, so I can just adhere it down like a sticker. And as a finishing touch, I've added some Studio Katia iridescent bubble jewels for a little bit of colour. And that finishes that card. So very, very different look. Don't think you could even tell that was a background. Now for my third card, and it's probably my favourite, this is quite a lengthy part of the video, so because I'm going to be doing some watercolouring. So I'm again using embossing ink and stamping down the background stamp 3 times onto Arch's cold press watercolour cardstock. I did it 3 times just because there's quite a bit of texture on this cardstock and I wanted to make sure I got a good impression. And then I'm heat embossing it in Wow Rose Gold embossing powder. The panel is actually cut slightly larger than A2 size card, and that way I can use some painter's tape and adhere it down onto a cutting board, which allows me to move the panel around if I need to, and it also keeps the panel of cardstock flat and stops it warping. I've added some various Nuvo Shimmer powders off to the side on a craft mat just by tapping them out. So I'm using Catherine Wheel, Cherry Bomb and Violet Brocade, which is like a purpley colour. And I'm using a water brush here so I avoid adding the water directly into the powder itself off on my craft mat. So the trick is, as I found, this is the first time I've ever watercoloured with these shimmer powders, is to first do a very light wash. So you just need a couple of flecks of powder with your water brush just to give a very light wash over the image itself. You can then go back, get a little bit more powder on your brush and just drop it in. And I'm using Arch's cold press, which is a very high quality watercolour cardstock, and I think that helps with the blending when doing painting. I haven't tried these shimmer powders on anything a little cheaper, like say Canson XL. I will have a go, see if it's as good. But the arches, I know, just really does help with the blending, keeps the paper a little bit damp for a little bit longer. So I've sped this up, but I'm going to talk you through a couple of tips that I found helped me when I was using these shimmer powders. So the first tip is do a base layer of just a very pale colour first. Don't add. I haven't done wet on wet here, so I'm doing it straight onto dry cardstock. I'm then going back in and adding a couple of drops of colour again into where you would find your shadows. So you can see, for example, on this background stamp, there is lines that depict the shading. So I'm using those lines as a guide to indicate where I need to put my darker colours, i.e. my shadows. So the other tip I have here is layer your colours. So I've done probably, over the course of this video, you'll see 4 or 5 layers on the bigger florals. So the first 2 layers on each flower were the same colour. First off, a very light wash, and then second was a bit of a darker drop in to the creases, the shadows of the same colour. So that bottom floral was all cherry bomb, the top one was also cherry bomb, the middle one was Catherine wheel, which is a kind of a reddish colour. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going in with some violet brocade and I'm adding that into the shadow areas. So I think it was Sandy Allnock, when I've been watching her Copic colouring classes. One of the key things for trying to get dimension is to make sure you have contrast. So what I'm doing here is going darker than I think I need to. The colours do dry back quite a lot, so meaning they fade as they dry. And I really wanted the intensity that comes with the colours in the Nuvo shimmer powders. So for that pink rose floral towards the top, I came in with the violet brocade, and I had almost like a chunky bit of the powder. With water is in my brush, obviously, so I had a chunky bit of the powder into the shadowy areas on that floral, and at first I was like, whoa, that's too intense, and I sort of spread it out with my water brush, and I really liked the sort of two-tone look that you get. So you can see there's like a dark purple wash over the lighter pink behind it, and it really gives the element of dimension. On this one, on the Catherine wheel, I'm also adding some violet brocade over the top just to see what would happen, and it kind of gives a more darker, more intense red. And on the bottom, I went more intense, so I added, so the first couple of layers on the bottom one were cherry bomb. I then went in with some Catherine wheel, which is the red, and you get another different look again. And as you can see, I'm going pretty dark here, but the contrast with the lighter layers underneath, which I've left as you get out towards the edge of each petal, I think kind of looks really, really cool. And it also sets off really well against the rose gold wow embossing powder. For the leaves, I've kept them relatively simple. So I'm using the Nuvo shimmer powder in Atlantis, which is a kind of greeny, bluey, briny green. And I'm going in with a light wash, so just a light, no shading kind of coat of the Atlantis. And then I've added the powder onto my brush as I did before, and put that right down in towards the bottom of each leaf, and then pulled it out with some water. So I got a double shade out of just one colour. Now for the background, I'm using, I think it's blue BLITZ, and I've watered it down a lot on my craft mat. I don't want any kind of shading in this background, and I just lightly went over that, and then I added a little bit of violet brocade just to kind of take the blue down a notch, and that's what you get, and I love it. I'm totally going to do some more videos on watercolouring with the powders. So this You Are Incredible die is also by Erin Creative, and I've die cut it directly out of the centre of my panel. I've now got a £110 top folding card base, which I'm covering with dry adhesive and particularly focused on the centre where I know the sentiment is going to be. And I'm adhering down my panel. So you want to make sure that that window where the sentiment is completely covered in adhesive. I've then die cut the sentiment again from white cardstock, and I'm inlaying the die cut, which will basically give you a completely smooth, flush finish. Make sure you save all the little pieces from the die cut watercut panel, because you're going to add those back in. I'm using a jewel picker. We're just going to pop them all back in so it's completely seamless and it looks, you know, there's no other white gaps left behind. I was very scared I was going to lose particularly the centre of that A, and that finishes the card. I actually did add some black splatters onto the background with the midnight ink mixed with water and a few sparkling clear pretty pink Posh sequins. And that finishes my cards. I hope you enjoyed. Please do think about subscribing to my channel if you did, and here's a couple of other videos you may enjoy. Have an awesome day. Bye!